Hello, and welcome to a demonstration of the nutrient workflow automation tool, exercising a capital expenditure workflow. Today, I'm going to demonstrate the different features of the workflow automation tool as they're applied to a typical capital expenditure automation workflow. We're going to go through the live request first and then look a little bit at the back end. So let me begin by talking about the dashboard very quickly here. So the dashboard is basically information about the requests as they're generated. We'll revisit this dashboard. Here we've got key performance indicators that tell us about how long each request or each segment of the request is taking. These are completely configurable. So we've got two of them, one measuring a single task and the other timer basically measuring the overall time to complete all the approvals for this request. Then we have an example of the reporting engine where we are displaying a single line of data for each particular request. So I'll talk a little bit about what the data is here, in that we've got custom columns that we chose as the administrators of this instance. We chose what particular fields are in this data. So we have a serial number that the system assigns to each request that's going to be unique. Then we have a project name that each person provides as they're filling out the form. Then a status, which gives us sort of an at-a-glance readout of where each particular request is on the path. Then we have the name of the person who requested this particular project, then the date on which it was entered. Then the next three fields have more to do with the routing of the particular request through the approval chain. So depending on the facility, we send it to a different facility manager based on the points of the compass. For the department, we send it to a different group of vice presidents that might wish to approve this, or depending on what line of business this project is associated with. And for the amount, we have gates built in at $200,000 and $500,000. So if we reach either of these values, we're going to seek further approvals than we would if we had a smaller value capital expenditure project. Then as the last column, we have the supporting documents, and these are documents that were uploaded in the initial form of this request. These are viewable either by downloading to the local machine or directly viewable by opening up the document in the document viewer, and we can see what we're doing here with that particular document filled out. So that's kind of a quick overview of what the dashboards do for you with regard to this kind of request. Now let's go ahead and launch this request. And so as we launch it, we'll go immediately to the first form of this workflow. And the forms within the workflow engine are completely configurable by the administrators of the site. This is just a sample form. There is a forms engine designer that allows you to create forms with the specific fields that you want and the specific layout that you want. So here we've got kind of a sample assortment of fields that correspond to a capital expenditure project. The fields are different types. The form has a bit of interactivity, which I'll talk about. So the form can actually update itself and ask different questions based on how the user answers previous questions. And there's also validation in the form. So each field that has an asterisk next to its label is actually required. And if I try to submit this form prematurely without providing all the required data, I actually get validation on the screen and the form doesn't submit until I've satisfied all these required fields. So let me go ahead and fill this out as we go. Put this in the Western region. The next field is going to be a drop-down list. So we'll choose what sort of a project type we're building. We're building a new building here. What facility? Depending on the facility that I choose, here's our first example of interactivity. So if I choose the northern facility, I'm going to get a list of northern states in the US. If I choose the eastern facility, then I get a list of states in the eastern part of the US. So this is an example of the sort of interactivity you can build into this form to drive what's going on here. So here we've got a non-required field, but we'll fill that out anyway. Here we've got another drop-down list, but this one allows me to do several different choices at once. And then this next radio button, depending on the choice I make here on the included in capital budget question, I get a budget year field that was previously hidden, but now it's displayed and it's required. So I can answer it easily by entering what budget year is attached to that. If I change my mind on that answer, that field disappears and is no longer required. If I summon it back, it's been cleared out and I can answer it differently. So the user is not locked into a particular answer depending on the first choice they give. Here, we'll enter maybe $500,000 for that. And so we're nearly done with the form. Our last field will be to upload a document into this request. So let me go ahead and choose a document here. In this case, a CSV file. And the form is complete, so let's go ahead and submit it. If we chose to complete this form in several sessions, we could also save the draft of this form and return to this form in the same request and the same data. We could recall this form with partial data and fill out the form in several sessions. So if we had a form that was fairly complex to complete, or maybe the data is hard to acquire, we could easily do that. So now let me go ahead and submit this. And immediately we move on to the next request. Currently, the workflow that I'm demonstrating to you is in what we call in a debug or demonstration mode. It is merely a few clicks of the mouse to convert this workflow into production, where the tasks are assigned to the specific people that are designated in the workflow setup. For purposes of demonstration or early debugging by the administrator, this sort of setup where we send tasks to the original submitter makes it very easy to walk through every single step in the workflow and confirm that you're actually getting the results that you expect. So here we've sent the request onto the facility manager for approval, and this particular task is an approval task. That's what we call it. It is in fact a review and routing task. So the manager here has three choices that they can make with regard to how this request should move forward. They can approve it as it is. They can send this request back for rework if they see some issues with this particular request, or they can deny this request and just completely cancel it immediately. The way that the manager in this case can review the data, they can click on a link to see a copy of the previously completed form. So they can review the data in this read-only form. And here we'll notice that we designated this project for the West, but we put it in the Eastern facility, and it's clearly a finance project, but we've assigned it to marketing. So we're going to request some changes here. We're going to choose a path that returns the request back to the original submitter, and we're going to send that original submitter an email in the background asking them to make changes so that when they are reassigned the original task, they will understand why they were handed this task back. So we're going to add a comment here. We're going to ask them to change the facility and the department. We'll click submit, and it will immediately transition back to the original task. And this will be the task assigned back to the original submitter. So they will get the email. They'll realize that they need to change these things. And we'll change this now to let's find the finance department. And we'll resubmit. This goes forward. The manager can now re-review, see that the changes were made, and all these changes and the approval decisions are being recorded in an audit trail that I'll show you in a few moments. So we'll go ahead and approve this now, and we'll make a comment that we're approving. We'll submit, and we'll move forward to the next task in the workflow. Now we've moved on to a higher level approval. Now it's the departmental VP approving, but the task is very much the same. We won't repeat what we did here. What I'd like to do is show you the overall map of the workflow. This is a map that the original workflow administrator designed, and this is a static copy that a user can look at and get a quick readout as to how far along this request has progressed and who's been involved in it. So the items here, the tasks that are highlighted in light green are completed tasks. In fact, I can click on one of these tasks, the form that we completed twice just now, and get a quick thumbnail readout of who completed this form, how many times did they complete it, and what time frames did they work on this. So you can see here that George has worked on this form twice. He sent it forward. It was approved on the second try. Now it's in the hands of the departmental VP, for whom it only just arrived. They haven't had a chance to work on it yet. And if we scroll down to the remainder of this workflow, we'll see that in fact there are items listed in gray here. These are steps that we either haven't reached yet, or maybe paths that we didn't execute because the conditions to go down those paths weren't satisfied. Things like rejection or escalation because maybe a deadline wasn't met to complete this task. That would be this escalation path. Here's the rejection path. Now, returning to the departmental VP task, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to summon the email that was sent to the vice president on behalf of the system. And notifications within workflow automation are very flexible. So we can have as much or as little information provided at each task step as is relevant for that worker. So the VP can have a very rich email that gives them all the details of this project so that if they are already familiar with this project, they can actually respond and approve to this project from their email client. Which is shown here. So they have each of the three choices that they would have in the main interface are reflected by unique one-time links that will allow the user to move this request forward. This bottom link on this email will allow the user to open a new browser tab on their current device, whether it's a mobile device or a full-on desktop. And if the user is logged on using single sign-on to the local network that they work in, this link will take them directly to that task without logging in again. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and approve this task. And these notifications can also be sent out through other channels. So if you're using Slack or other instant messaging channels, you could send these notifications that way as well. Now I've gotten this new tab in my browser and I'm going to indicate that the VP is approving. The VP will actually get a confirmation that they chose the approval path. Then we'll close this and close this email. And at this point, this task is already complete. So if I tried to complete it again, I actually would get an error from the system telling me that it's already complete. So at this point, let's actually move back to the dashboard where we started, and we can see that already this live data has been updated on the dashboard. So we have a new request here, pending CFO approval, issued just a few minutes ago for $500,000 for the Western facility and sponsored by the finance department. If I choose to return to this request, I just click on the link that indicates that I can open this request, and I'm taken back to the request and specifically to the request detail page. Now, the request detail page is a page that exists for every request that's generated within our system, and it has an audit trail that builds up as the request proceeds. The audit trail is configurable here, but by default, it starts with the summary data, so the serial number of the request, the customized name of the request, sort of incorporating the project name and the serial number here, the workflow name that we happen to be in, what status are we at, the identity of the person who put this request into the system, and the day and time at which the request was initiated. Then for any open tasks, they'll be listed here. If I happen to be one of the people assigned to one of these tasks, then I'll have a play button that will allow me to open the task immediately and go forward to it. Then we also have the completed forms. We can view those, but most importantly, we also have a history of what's gone on in this request. And this is a sequential history of how the tasks have been executed so far. We have here the original capital expenditure form as it was filled out for the marketing department and the Eastern facility. We can see then that the next task was the approval, where the approver sent it back for rework and asked that the facility and department be changed. Next, we have the second time that the form was filled out. So the department is now the finance department and the Western facility. Now the facility manager approved it, went forward, the departmental VP approved it in their turn, and then the CFO now has it in their queue. This is a complete audit trail that's available to you. It is reportable through the reporting engine or through any other business intelligence tool that you might care to plug into the production database. The data here is also freely available to be shared or integrated with other systems in your environment, or the data is migratable at any point in whole or in part to any other system that you might choose to move it to. So that's available as well. So that's kind of the depth of the audit trail. Now I'd like to talk just briefly about how a user navigates around the system. And I'll first by mentioning here that the administrative menu is something that most users are not going to ever see nor deal with. This is only reserved for those folks who have had permissions defined in the workflow automation system where they are actually maintaining the processes, the forms, the reports, and so on. Most users are going to only work with a subset of the actions menu. And I'll talk about the top level menus here. Start a request does exactly what the name implies. It allows you to kick off a request, whether from a dashboard or from this menu where you can access any workflow that you've been given access to. Once you've kicked off a request, then you can go to the View My Requests menu and you will see a custom list. Every user will have their own list of all the requests that they've ever submitted. This list is searchable. You can filter by what's still in progress versus what's already completed. You can also search by range of serial numbers, submission dates, the description or the status. So easily you can go back through your history and find, since we can see here that George has issued about 180 requests so far. The flip side of creating requests is being assigned a task within the system. So George also has a screen that's unique to him and shows him all the tasks that he is currently assigned to, including things that he should be completing. And even if George shares this task with somebody else in the department, they will each have a unique listing on their task menu to let them know. You also have the option of creating due dates here to indicate what might be a priority and what might be ahead of or behind schedule in terms of completion, so that users can sort of prioritize their work from here. You also have the ability to run reports on an ad hoc basis. And then for supervisors and system administrators in your environment, you have monitor requests and manage requests. Monitor gives to, say, supervisors of a specific department the ability to see particular requests that they are interested in reviewing. So we've got different requests that can be viewed and seen here. You cannot complete any tasks, nor can you edit any of the request data, but you can see what's going on here. In terms of manage requests, this is for system administrators to come through and not only see all the requests in the system, but also influence the outcome of any particular request. So when we first visited the request management flow view, we saw a static view of the system that showed us basically just status information about how the system works. When we come here as a system administrator, we actually have menus of commands that appear depending on the context of whether or not a task is completed or not. So one of the first things that I can do is change the due dates on a task. And this is as a system administrator. So only system administrators would have access to this menu. I can change due dates, move them forwards or backwards as needed. If need be, I can change the number of recipients. I can change who's assigned to a particular task, though users can also self-delegate. There's a feature within workflow automation that allows a user to create what we call a delegation, very similar to an out-of-office email notification, where tasks are redirected to colleagues based on periods of time. And also you can designate specific workflows to designate the workflow so that nothing gets stuck in a person's queue because they're out of the office or at a conference or otherwise unavailable. So the system administrator can also help with that as well. Then if we have a request that has been directed down a particular path, and maybe we want to change that outcome. So let's say, for example, that in a previous iteration of this request, or in the first iteration, the departmental VP rejected this request and sent it down the rejection path, which took it all the way to completion. But then we discovered that maybe the circumstances of this request have changed, and we want to have a different outcome for this request. And possibly this request has gone through several layers of approval that we don't want to replicate. We don't want to have to recreate those approvals for just a simple change. So what I can do is, as the system administrator, I can come in here, reset this task, put it back in the departmental vice president's queue. And at that point, now they can make a different decision than they did. So where this request went originally down the rejection path, now it's going to go down the approval path to the next level of person to approve. So very quickly, this has been a review of capital expenditure workflow requests within the Nutrient Workflow Automation System. I hope this was helpful and informative, and please reach out if you have any questions or are interested in any more information about our system. Thank you. Goodbye.